Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and a very warm welcome to this webinar today. My name is Martin, and I'm part of the student support team here at ACCA. And I'm pleased to be joined on this session today by audit and assurance expert tutor Roger Gitonga. Now, this session is designed to support you with your preparations for the audit and assurance exam. And Roger is here to share his insights from the recently released March-June 24 examiner's report, as well as share some technical examples from previous exams. As well, we'll look at some practical advice for tackling your AA exam and some strategies to avoid common pitfalls, which will help you improve your exam performance. Now, this is your chance to ask any questions that you'd like us to respond to. We have a team in the back end who will be responding to your questions as the webinar progresses. So please do put in your questions bright and early. And Roger as well will pick a few of those questions towards the end. Now, before I hand over to Roger, I just like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons, and these will be useful in the course of this webinar. You'll see a help icon on the left, which provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There are some icons for the slides and the media player. You'll need to see this, so just ensure that you've got those selected as well. There is also an attendee chat function, which will help you to engage with fellow webinar attendees, and we request that you do not share any personal information on these platforms. Now, there is also a resource list. You'll see an icon that looks like a file symbol. And if you click on that, you'll be able to access the resources that are relevant to today's webinar. You can always rearrange your screen in the way that you prefer and resize the windows if need be. And if at any point you can't hear what we are saying or you can't see the visuals, please do refresh your browser. Now, this session is going to be recorded and you'll have access to the recording. So you receive an email tomorrow with a link on how to access the recording. So no worries if you miss out on anything, you can always watch this session again. So I'm going to hand over to Roger now, and just a reminder that please do put in your questions early so that we can be able to respond to as many as we possibly can. Now, over to you, Roger.
Right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Martin. I see quite a bit of love even before we have begun. Now, first and foremost, allow me to welcome each and every one of you into this particular session as we try to really understand what the heck is this thing called audit and assurance, and probably just to dive into an appreciation of what the examiner has been able to see repeatedly when it comes to this paper. Now, I want us to first and foremost, I would love to really get to know, where you guys logging in from, which countries, which cities, which towns. We love the fact that ACCA is a globally recognized body. So where are you joining in from? Probably you can just give me a few, appreciations on where you guys currently are. All right, so just kindly drop your, I see some of us from Pakistan over there. It's lovely. I see London. Wow. All right. I see India as well. Glasgow. Wow. Fantastic. Malaysia. You see, my goodness. And a lot of us from India, Vietnam, Nepal, Switzerland, Georgia, Uganda, Croatia. Man, it's lovely to have each and every one of us here today. As you can see, there's a beauty literally in already the people here. So let's dive into this very interesting area. As you can see a bit about myself, I don't have to read it. I'm sure you've picked up a few things here and there about me. Please note, I'm from Kenya personally, but I don't live with lions, okay? I don't live with lions. There's usually a notion that in Africa, when you've landed into the airport, there are lions. Well, that's not particularly the case. But let's dive a bit into this. Now, what are we going to be looking at? First and foremost, we're going to be looking at the examiner's report, key insights, some technical examples from previous exams, yay, and then we will get some practical advice from him and then strategies to avoid common pitfalls. And I'm sure this is something you'd really want to touch on, truly, because I personally, having done audit, might have actually experienced certain aspects here that I want to avoid, and I hope that we can also avoid as well. And then we're going to have live Q&A sessions with the expert tutor, which is myself. Now, let's touch on a few things here. Why do we actually look at the examiner's report? 3 reasons. First and foremost, to touch on your strengths. The examining team has shared their observations from the marking process to highlight on their strengths. Secondly, to touch on the weaknesses. Now, I want us to understand that first and foremost, why we look at strengths is because it's something you can look at and say, you know what, if this is something I've been doing, I can continue to do it again. I can repeat this again. I can consistently apply this again, and I don't have to fail. But secondly, you also are touching on your weaknesses, things you want to avoid, things that students have done in the past that you do not want to do again. And if this is not your first sitting in the audit paper, you know, I'm here to encourage us. You can do this. Really, we want to touch on your weaknesses. Audit and assurance is not as bad as we are thinking. I know that by the time we are done with this, hopefully we can fix on a few things here and there that will improve our performance. And then 3, another reason why we have the examiner's report is to really offer constructive advice for those sitting the exam in the future. So those are the 3 reasons why we touch on the examiner's report. My friends, I am here for you. Now, let's touch on a few areas here of concern, a few tips now with audit risk. Now, when we have the audit risk question, I want us to understand that if you're being asked for, let's say, 5 audit risks to identify, there's a high chance there are about 8 audit risks in the scenario. Pick your best 5. So you might go through the scenario, you might read through the whole scenario, and do not ignore the first paragraph. We appreciate that many times, many students ignore the first paragraph, especially with audit risk. Yet you might identify that this is a new client, which would indicate that this could be a detection risk. So many times read the whole scenario, highlight the risks you've been able to identify, and then from there, choose your best 5 if they're asking for 5. But find comfort in the fact that we will always give you more than the risks being required for. Secondly, highlight and choose your best points as we have said here. There are areas you will be comfortable in explaining. So for instance, there are some risks I normally tell my students, there's some risks that you probably might have already familiarized yourself with. So for instance, let me look at one example. 95% of the time, if not all the time, if there's a receivables mentioned in the scenario, there's a high chance that the issue here is recoverability, and hence overvaluation of receivables could occur, or understatement of irrecoverable debts. So you see, if I've seen this repeatedly in other questions, there's a high chance that this could be the case. You see, you want to appreciate the fact that many times the beauty with risks, to be honest with you, is that it is not that hard to particularly create. It's not easy to create very many new unique risks, because in audit, which I have done, you appreciate the fact that many times, truly, you might find the same risks being repeated multiple times. This is an area I am sure you can ace on. You can quote me. Thirdly, we have copy-paste with the risk identified. I love the fact that this is one of the most useful tools to do for me. I mean, guys, time, there's a lot of time pressure in the exam. You don't have the time to type the risk. So copy paste it, but copy paste with wisdom, because truly, can you imagine? And I know you guys have experienced this. I sit in the exam room. There's an interesting fella dressed like myself, looking like he knows why he's here, while there's you who looks like, oh my God, why am I here? You know? And at that point in time, this person looks, they're typing while you are trying to look for Q on your keyboard. You're looking for A. Where is A? Where is A? And you realize there's a lot of pressure on that day. So, truthfully, look, identify, copy paste, so that you can save at least more time in explaining the risk and giving the response. 4, FA knowledge is key. I like the fact that most people say, I've not done FR. Can I fail? And I know a lot of times, and I say this with a lot of respect, some people say you can't pass audit if you've not done FR. That is not really true. To be very honest with you, many times why people would prefer doing FR first and then audit is because it reminds them of some FA knowledge. So for instance, I will never find a risk on impairment of assets in audit. You see, you don't even learn about impairment of assets in FA, but you learn about impairment in FR. I will not learn about biological equipments, in FA, but you learn about it in FR. So we will never set an audit risk on biological equipments. You get? So you do appreciate FA knowledge is really key. And that's what the examiner stated. Now, with ratios, you appreciate the fact that when ratios are being used, many times you will appreciate that they will state, maybe give 5 ratio calculations. Many times students ask here, do we have to show our workings? And the answer is no. Put your answer there, all right? Write the answer only as you're comparing the prior and the current year. I normally find this to be the easiest 5 marks for ratios, because really we don't test too many ratios. Profitability, we don't test ROCE or return on capital employed, for instance. Okay, I will not find gearing ratios. You understand? So you appreciate the fact that I will see things like liquidity, current ratio, inventory turnover period, gross profit margin, right? Now, when you get your ratios, receivables collection period, there was a scenario in the exam that was that had the receivables collection period having increased from 40 days to 67 days. Now, you see, in this case of this significant movement, you appreciate the fact that there was a high chance that there could be a risk of evaluation. But the problem was that the marker or the examiner didn't want you to just speak about the increase from 40 to 67, because in the scenario, there was an additional piece of information. You see, it was stated that the credit controller was absent. Now, I want you to understand here, when you're copy pasting, you don't want to copy paste one part and leave the other. So if I only copy pasted, let's say for instance, that the ratios had increased from 40 days to 67 days, and I neglected the fact that the credit controller was absent, I would not get a full mark for identification. So what I should do here is ideally ensure that both are captured, that it is as a result of the credit controller being absent that the receivables collection period increased from 40 days to 67 days. Therefore, this indicates a risk, a possible risk of evaluation of receivables. Now, if 2 pieces of information result in the same risk, then credit is only available once, as the information should be used in conjunction. I know a lot of students love to gamble here. Let me take one part and then put the other one there and then get 2 points, No. If they give the same risk, put them in conjunction because they point to the same risk. Okay, I hope we're good. Let's move to the next point. So I love risk because it's easy to explain. I know for a fact that when I want to explain the risk, there are only three ways I can choose from. The first way is either you state the specific area of the financial statements impacted with an assertion. So for instance, I say an overvaluation of receivables. I could say cutoff, revenue cutoff. I can explain that way. Or I can use one of my favorites for students, over, under, misstated. And here you still have to specify the specific area. Now, when we say specific area, I don't expect you to say non-current assets if it is clearly property, plant, and equipment. Because you see, non-current assets is wide. I don't expect you to say current assets while it is specifically inventory. So specify which area particularly, which account balance are you speaking about, which transaction area are you speaking about, and then you can refer to the over, the under, or the misstated. And when you're specifying misstated, please, it has to be crystal clear that it could be either under or over. But if we see that it's a possibility, it's an overstatement of the receivable, for instance, and you write misstatement, we will not award you a mark. Now don't give up, we're still going on. And then the third way, which is not usually the most favorite, but it is by ideally explaining the risk using the components. So either inherent, control, or detection. I normally say that if you understand why it is a risk, then it is easy for you to respond to it. Now, the auditor's response needs to be, one, practical. All right? So what does this mean? If I tell you here that there was an issue of an inventory count, and let's say these guys have 50 warehouses, I don't expect you to write there, the auditor should visit all inventory counts for all 50 warehouses. That's not practical. They don't have time, So it has to be practical. Secondly, it should not be what the management does. It should be what the auditor will do. To do what? To particularly help them form a conclusion on the identified audit risk. I like to put it in this way. I'm having an issue with the fact that inventory could be under or overstated because they don't conduct inventory counts, for instance. So my biggest fear, or they do it, but you realize that items are still coming in and are still going out during the inventory count. So I know there could be a risk of inventory being understated or overstated. Why? Since inventory could come in and it has not, and yet it was inventory for the following year, not the current year. So it could be double, it could be counted as part of inventory for the current year, or some inventory might be omitted, right? In the process, and that could lead to understatement. So as a response, I'm thinking, how can I, as an auditor, verify if the risk is there or not? Notice the word I've used here, how, because the process, the concept of a process tests on how. The concept of explanation tests on why. So when I look at explaining, I need to answer the question why. While with response, I need to answer the question how. All right? So how can I, as an auditor, actually verify if this risk is particularly there or not? For instance, now, let's come to controls. When you're identifying controls is a very shaky area for some students, because the thing is that it has a lot of subjectivity. You ask yourself, honestly speaking, can I really master all controls? And the answer is no, my friends. But within your own lives, I have to appreciate the fact that you live with controls. Curfews are controls. My fingerprint scan on my phone, my face scan on my phone is a control, right? Even the mere fact, I was telling my students, one of the habits we have in our primary schools here or in our junior schools is when you do your homework, I will check my child's homework, not to verify if they've done the right thing, but just to verify they've done the homework. So I will sign the diary, and then when the child or when my child goes to school, the teacher will look at the diary and will see that the parent has signed, verifying that they have gone through the homework. I, as a parent, I'm a control, right? So how do you identify controls? So read the whole scenario first. Don't get tired. We want to engage you. We want to engage your mind. Engage with the content and try and see whether you can find the controls. I like to look at controls in this way. When I'm reading through the whole scenario, if I pick a control, I'll ask myself, how does this thing prevent or detect and correct any fraud, risk, and error? If I can't get an answer, that's not a control, right? So I'll ask myself, how can this prevent or detect and correct fraud, risk, and error? If I can't give an answer to that when I'm identifying, that's not a control. As you read, highlight. Choose your best highlighted answers. Then, from there, try to ask yourself, remember, these controls are designed to prevent or detect material misstatement. How do you explain the control? So think about what the aim of the control is. I like to look at it this way. Why do I have a fingerprint scanner on my phone? You won't say to prevent fraud. You understand? What you would tell me is you're trying, Roger, to ensure that you prevent unrestricted access. Now you've explained to me that control, what it does, right? Why do I lock my house? So that we do not have any cases, or we reduce the chances of the theft of items in my house. So you explain in the control, right? Why do I sign my child's or my children's diary? It's because I am able to bring verification that I have gone through that particular homework, and therefore the teacher can confirm that the parent has actually gone through that work. So I'm not going to touch there and say, I'm trying to prevent fraud in my child's work. Oh no. What will my child think of me? Man, I might be left to be fatherless, and I'm the father. So try to ideally appreciate what potential misstatement is being prevented or detected. Now we're not done. Let's touch on test of controls. So let me first of all say something here. Please, 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 the person who does the testing is the auditor. I love the fact that students have an idea, but sometimes we see students saying, you know what, the management should. No, it's the auditor. So how do we test controls? You're trying to confirm whether those controls are working. I know that many students struggle between test of controls and even substantive procedures. What's the difference? So I appreciate the fact that the test of controls really helps me to really find out if this control is working or not. So you tell me, again, I'll use an example. You tell me that I am the control. Remember, I check my child's diary, right? So how would you know that I always sign the diary every day. You will actually obtain the diary, right? And inspect it. And what are you looking for? You are inspecting the diary to identify whether you can find my signature every single day to verify that I actually check the homework. Because that control is sign, after I check the homework, sign. The parents should sign. So what do, my auditors? You obtain the diary and you inspect the diary to see whether I actually sign the homework or not. So you realize, what are you doing? You're testing to see whether I do what I said I will do. You're testing to see whether that control is working. You see? So you appreciate the fact that's what you're basically doing. You guys tell me that you do bank reconciliations every month. I, as an auditor, needs to verify, how can I find out if you do bank reconciliations every month or not? You see, even tests of controls, it's still a procedure because it answers the question, how? How can I verify if the controls are working? How? Now, let's look at deficiencies. You appreciate the fact that a lack of control or control effectiveness is what a deficiency is. Some students ask me, how do I identify the problem? Well, I look at it in this way. When we're talking about deficiencies, my focus is primarily on trying to ensure that either, one, I've identified a control, but the control is not working effectively. For instance, you could say you guys perform bank reconciliations, but you don't perform it monthly. So you see, the problem here is not that there's no bank reconciliation, it's how it's operating. It's meant to be done monthly, but you don't do it monthly. So I appreciate the fact that, wow, that's a deficiency. So you've identified the control, but it's not operating effectively. For instance, again, there is meant to be CCTV cameras, but they're switched off most of the time to save on power. Then what's the point? Deficiency, the control is there, but it's not working effectively. The second way to identify a deficiency is to actually realize that the control is missing completely. So, for instance, people just walk in and walk out without clocking their attendance. So there's no way of recording attendance. Deficiency. Copy-paste carefully. Now, when you're explaining your deficiencies, explain how it affects the business. What's the negative problem of this? Why is this such a problem? Like, for instance, why, if we don't perform bank reconciliations monthly, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? Well, you could tell me, not Roger, because here I am. I'm the manager, and I'm telling you, auditors, stop stressing my life. Like, we don't perform bank reconciliations every month. We are busy. What's the problem? And I want you to imagine you're explaining to me, and you'll tell me, you know what, Roger, if you don't do this, you people will not be able to identify errors within your bank statement, within your cash book. And hence, there's a high chance of either theft occurring without you detecting it timely, on a timely basis. And I'll say, oh my God. So someone could actually be stealing from us, but we don't know. And you'd say, yes, because you guys don't do your bank reconciliations. Now, of course, your explanation won't be that long, but I want you to just get the gist of how you're telling me what could go wrong. What's the negative effect of me not fixing this problem? All right? Then recommendations. Wow. You appreciate the fact that it should be sufficiently detailed. So what do I mean by this? Tell me who will do it. How will they do it? When will they do it, for instance? You want to explain that. So don't tell me, you guy, you do this thing. You know, which guy? Is it the payroll coordinator? Is it, I mean, the senior clerk? I mean, who are you talking about? Right? So if you tell me that this person should observe the process of clocking in and out, which person? Tell me who you're telling. Who should do what? I want you to imagine, I'm your manager. I'm the manager here. So you're telling me the recommendation that, you know what, you guys should fix this problem. How should we fix it? And then you say, observe the clocking in and out process. So who should do that? Maybe the supervisor of the factory. That makes sense. So when should they supervise? Should they just stand there the whole day? Should we be paying them to just stand there and watch people constantly walk in and out? And you'll say, no. Supervise at the specific times of coming in or clocking in and coming out. And be like, that makes sense. So they don't have to be there the whole time, right? And say, yes, fantastic, I love it. Look at this, I've given actions. You've told me what to do. You've not told me what the aim is. What's an objective? The objective is, is you now trying to explain why we're doing the action. So instead of telling me what I should do, you tell me, you know what, Roger, what you guys, it's important that there's always someone observing the clocking in and out process. I'm like, okay, fine, but you've not told me what to do. You've just told me that we should just ensure that there's someone checking. So that's why with recommendations, we don't use ensure that. Because if you use ensure that, how do we ensure? Ensure that, how do we ensure? So run away from objectives, give actions. Give actions, let them be practical. And then focus on what management should do rather than what the auditor. Okay, the recommendations are for the management to do, not for us, the auditor. Now, let me improve my speed a bit. Audit evidence. Tailor your answer. Avoid vague answers. Now, please note, I will explain this. Don't worry. I will explain this. What does this tailoring your answer mean? Tailor your answer to the scenario. Now, I love the fact that unlike controls and risk, where we identify the specific deficiencies or the specific risks from the scenario, in audit evidence, we're not identifying really anything. We're not copy-pasting anything, right? So sometimes you'll ask me, how do you tailor your answer? Let me explain this. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where you look at a case example. Let me give you a case example. You find that the scenario states that receivable circularization didn't work. The response rate is extremely low. And then you, in your excitement, write in your rote-land answers, what happens is that you type there, perform receivable circularization, full stop. Man, you're proud of your answer. But you see, we wrote there on the scenario, this thing didn't work. So we don't expect you to give that. You understand? Secondly, sometimes if there's been a mention, let's say, of a credit controller in the scenario, you could talk about discuss with the credit controller rather than just discuss with management. You can be specific because you've seen that name, you've seen that title in the scenario. The times when you've given you figures, let's say of provisions or allowances of the current and the prior year. And you can actually use that and say, you know what, we can compare these two figures and appreciate the fact that because there's a significant difference, discuss with management whether there's a need to increase the provision for the same or not. But let's look at the answers. Avoid vague answers. Tests must be sufficiently detailed, noting clearly which source document should be used. This is where FA comes in. Invoices, purchase and sales invoices, credit notes, right? You appreciate things like the non-current asset register. You appreciate documents like the board minutes. And why are you getting these things? Why are you obtaining or inspecting the board minutes? What do you want to see there? Right? Now, I'll give an appreciation of this. Please remember, the distinction between substantive procedures is this. Substantive procedures detect material misstatements. Tests of controls focus on the operating effectiveness of the controls. So in simple English, Substantive procedures touch on figures. Tests of controls do not. Tests of controls answer the question yes or no. Do the controls work? Yes or no? All right. Read the scenario clearly, stating that a trade payables confirmation will not be performed. Therefore, no credit was awarded for this procedure. So this was mentioned in the scenario, and then students went on to write in the answer, perform circularization. Yes. And unfortunately, they did not score. Now, when you're generating substantive procedures for either trade payables or trade receivables, you're told here it is so important that the focus of the tests is on the statement of financial position. My goodness, I love this. You see, the times when we focus on, when we're talking on receivables, you're tempted to talk about sales. True? Because, I mean, credit sales equates to receivables. But credit sales are recorded in the statement of profit or loss. They are transactions. Receivables are balances. So when you're looking at the assertions, there are some assertions specifically used to test balances and not transactions, and vice versa. So there are times you could give one that tests on that, and that doesn't help. And let me increase my speed. Marks are awarded in this way. Discussion of the issue is 1 mark. And this is reports. When you discuss the issue, 1 mark. Now, discussion of the issue basically means, it doesn't mean that candidates should just rewrite the fact from the question. Candidates need to explain that the formal closure plan, let's say, for instance, you need to explain what could go wrong if this thing is not handled, if they don't adjust. So probably you could say, you know what, a formal closure plan was announced pre-year end, and a constructive obligation exists at the year end. And that without inclusion of provision will be understated and profit overstated. So I go on to explain that because these guys have not made this amendment, what it could result to in the financial statements is maybe this could be understated, that could be overstated. Almost sounds like a risk, but what you're basically doing is you're trying to discuss why it's a problem. Okay, why is this an issue if you don't make the amendment? Secondly, the assessment of materiality. Here we just, show the computation, or show whether it's, you do the computation, and then from there you dictate whether it is material or not. And then thirdly, and this with the materiality, if you want to get the benchmarks, look at chapter 10 of your study hub. Then we have here a description of the type of modification. Is it a qualified except for? Is it, do you have to particularly give a disclaimer of opinion? Do you have to give an adverse opinion, And then what it can affect your report. Now, in discussion, you show the implication to the financial statements. That's what I was talking about there. Please note, no credit is awarded for qualified reports or the audit report is modified. How is it modified? Reports are not usually qualified. It's the opinion that is qualified, not the report, okay? Not the report. And I do a video on this on the ACCA study student resources tab. Now let's look at some examples very quickly. So we appreciate the fact that we have here a question. And I'm going to pick up a few things here. I've highlighted a few aspects there, as you can see. And as I read the whole scenario, I just wanted us to show, how do we deal with this? First and foremost, we particularly appreciate on the first, let me start on something here. There's something there written 1st of July. This is what we call the dating convention. And in the dating convention, what happens is that all papers will normally have 1st of July, okay? Now, if you realize, like for instance, in this question, it says for the year ending 30th of September, we know that if today is 1st of July and the year end is 30th of September, then we're in the planning stage. So this is very common with risk. But if it was 1st of July and we realize that the year end was, let's say, 31st of March, for instance, or 30th of April, then we are at the finalization stage, okay? Now, we first and foremost read the scenario, highlight as we read, and then from there, I want to come to this. So I'll pick up a few things. I've identified the risk. This is a new client. I come to explaining. Now, I want us to read some something here that's critical. You appreciate the fact that as the team is not familiar with the accounting policies, transactions and balances of the company there will be an increased detection risk. Now, allow me to touch on something here. We don't say there's an increase in detection risk, and that's all. No. You explain why. So one of the hacks I give my students is tempting them to say, when you're explaining, even if you want to write, there's a risk of receivables being overstated, after that, use the word since. Because the word since will force you to explain. It will say there's a risk of receivables being overstated since, and then you'll have to explain. The receivables might not be recoverable. All right, so you see, you're forced to explain. If you only just say receivables or there's a detection risk, you've not necessarily explained why you think there's a detection risk. All you've done is you've just stated a component of the risk. I hope that's clear. Now we come to this part, and I say here, what if I explain the risk in 2 points? Because you see, there's the part of detection, and there's the part where we're not so sure about the opening balance. What happens here? Well, you realize we'll only award you 0.5 for the first one. You'll only get a full maximum point for one of them, but not for both. Okay? So don't waste too much time over-explaining or even giving 2 explanation points. And then the response, full 1 mark. And I appreciate here with the detection risk, what should I do as an auditor now that this client is new? Well, spend more time understanding them, right? Allocate more time for the team members to understand the company because it's new to you. And at the same time, probably have a debriefing amongst your team to identify any key risk areas. Fantastic. Now you're talking. This is another risk. So we realize here, the first risk starts on the price of components have been increasing steadily, leading to a reduction in gross profit margin, but inventory is valued at cost. All right, so the net realizable value of components may have fallen below the cost incurred by the company. So what does that result to? In the inventory valuation being overstated. So you see, we're explaining. Then I come to the next component, response. So now let me tell you, with my response, I'm thinking, my goodness. So inventory valuation may be overstated. How can I be able to confirm if that is true or not? What do? The audit team should discuss with their finance director whether they're aware. Fantastic. But we can also select a sample of inventory items, and then compare the cost. Where can I get the cost from? On the purchase invoice with the sales price charged at and after the year end. Why am I doing all that? Because I want to confirm that NRV is above cost. Because remember, my fear is inventory valuation may be overstated. So I need to confirm, is that really true or not? So I can select a sample of inventory items, compare their cost from their purchase invoice and their sales price, just to see if NRV is actually above cost or not. Because if NRV is not above cost, then inventory valuation might be overvalued, overstated. Audit evidence. Now, in this question, very quickly, we appreciate the fact that we are told here about existence and valuation. Describe the substantive procedures, and they are very specific, existence and valuation. Now, in the scenario, one of the things that I see here very quickly is that I appreciate it's 6 months, so I need to give 6 points. But at the same time, I appreciate the fact that there's a mention there of circularization will not be performed this year. So I don't want to make the same mistake in my answer by repeating that. So look at all these points. My goodness, these are just some of the answers I could pick up. Now, in many times, I want to ensure that I give answers that tie to the assertion as requested. But secondly, I also want to ensure I don't overdo it with analytical procedures. All right? Very important. Don't overdo it with analytical procedures. So you'll realize here a few things. And when the recording is out, you can actually pause here and just look at some of the pointers. What you notice with substantive procedures, I have, for instance, a verb, like now in the third point, it says review board minutes. Fantastic. And I can even look at 3 more there. Right? Just a few, 3 more. Let me go back. Sorry. I want us to notice something here. With the third point, what do? Review the verb. What am I reviewing? The document, board minutes. Why am I doing that? The reason, to identify whether there are any significant concerns in relation to payments by customers. So 3 aspects: the verb, the document, why you're doing it. That is how we give a detailed substantive procedure. Now, practical advice as we wrap up. Okay? So what are my winning tips? Man, practice, practice, practice. I know you can't get tired of this. I know we've mentioned it over and over again, but practice on the practice platform. The benefits of this is that it gives you an appreciation of how the exam will look like. You can practice under timed environments so that you actually are not running out of time. Thirdly, read the technical articles. Man, these things are gems, because there are times when we've actually hidden some of the few things that we want you to understand from there. Third, we have topic explainer videos. I'm sure you've heard my voice before in some of them, and you'll appreciate that we break down some of these areas a bit more. There's a video that hopefully we might release later that will actually break down the preparations for every area of audit. And then 4 or 5, utilize weekends. Man, some of us, I know, work, and I appreciate that. Use your weekends. Be a loner, but not lonely. That means take time to work. You know, sometimes these people who want to spend time with you, they're nice. They have your interests at heart, but you need that time alone. Study leave days, maximize on your preparation. Use lunch hour breaks to practice section A. All right? I like this one. They're just very quick answers as you move on. Okay? Now, very quickly, please tell me here, do you guys practice questions on this platform? Just very quickly in a minute. Do you? Do you really? Because I want to also give time for our... Just click on your answers there very quickly. Do you? Very quickly. Very quickly, do you? Just 1 minute. All right, let's see here. 10 seconds. Get about 100. Half of us. Fantastic. All right. So some of us do, some of us don't. Please do. Please do. All right. Now, strategies to avoid common pitfalls very quickly. Gain your knowledge. I call it my KAMs, KAMs, not key audit matters, but build on your knowledge. Now, knowledge touches on this. There's knowing your content and knowing of your content. The people who I can say here, do you know audit tools? And you can tell me, oh yeah, I know of that. But there's someone else who can tell me, I know that. Know that. Aim to know that. All right? And knowledge comes with understanding. So when you understand, you increase your depth of your knowledge. Secondly, apply. Application comes in 2 aspects. Practically, if you're working, but also exam application. Know how this area is tested, and that comes through doing questions. And then be a master. Practice, and practice comes in 2 aspects. Quality and quantity. Quantity looks at doing many questions so that you can know how one area is tested. But then quality comes to the appreciation that you also know how well you understand that area so well that if you're given that concept again, you ace it. Sleep well. I know this is hard, yeah? But man, get some sleep. Your brain shall function extremely or improve effectively so if you sleep well. At least 2 days to the exam. Get some sleep. Your memory retention will also be better. Thirdly, download the exam docket. All right. And then fourth, let me finish with this. I had a student some 2 years ago who unfortunately was doing an exam like your time in September. But then when she came to my group in the month of June, because we start our sessions in June, and I remember, unfortunately, in July, she missed a whole month of my class. And the reason was because she had been misdiagnosed with cancer. And you can imagine how much pain she went through. At the end of July, call it a miracle, as she was being tested, they were told, wait, we can't see anything. Wait, I think we misdiagnosed you. Unfortunate, but I want you to imagine how much time had been wasted. So by August, she comes to me and says, Mr. Roger, I want to still do this audit paper. And I said, are you sure you can be able to do it? I mean, you've not been in class. We're only left with about 3 weeks. And she said, yes, I think I can. Man, she engaged me continually as she went through the content and she practiced the questions and she passed with a 65. Can you imagine? So if you feel like you don't have time, you feel hopeless, you feel like it's too much to take in, you don't give up. You can do this. You can do this. So, when do you think our debriefs are? Very quickly. When do you think our pre-September mocks and debriefs release dates are? Please click very quickly, 1 more minute, so I can answer our questions very quickly. As I look through the questions, just picking up some of the questions now. All right, as we choose, where do you think? When do you think? Are they out yet? Just click on the answer there. Be sure to appreciate this. All right, very quickly. So when do you think? So a majority of you, there's a bit of confusion here, but the answer is 12th of August. The mocks were out on 12th of August. The debriefs are already out. Today, you can check them out. You can check them out. So let me touch on some of the Q&As. What should exactly be the content of audit risk and internal controls questions to obtain a mark? And can I write it in my own words? I've already explained this part. I would love you to check, especially on the controls question video I've done on the ACCA Student Resources tab. It can really help you and explain this. And yes, write in your own words. You have the freedom. We just want to see whether you understand. All right? You don't have to emulate the kit. You don't have to write it in such hard language. But there are some things will look like. For instance, instead of saying check, use the word inspect. Instead of saying look, observe, right? Instead of saying go through, review, right? So you can use those terminologies, but you can use your own words. How to study for AA for longer durations, because unlike FR, I'm burnt out after studying for even 2 hours. I understand this. I can even do this like you. Man, you're a master. I would really read this. I would read for, when I was doing audits some many years back, I would actually break it down into 20 minutes, right? So I'm a night owl. So I do long questions at night and then the shorter questions. We didn't have multiple choice questions, but if I was you, I would do multiple choice questions during, in my past time. That's when I know I can squeeze them in anytime. But when it comes to the content particularly, right now, this last month is questions, questions, questions. This is what you want to really work on. Rather than just going through content after content, it can feel like you're swimming in the Pacific and you've never seen an island, right? My question is that how to practice for short questions that come in exams and are very specific. Fantastic. I love this question because we have knowledge-based questions. So what I usually do with my students is that we usually set sometimes depending on the time, we set 1 day to just touch on, we take the kit, we take the study hub, we just pick the knowledge-based questions and you just do them. Because that way it helps, it forces you to go back to your content and you understand. But let me also give you an answer that I use here. Sometimes I don't even look at the answers, I look at the marking scheme. You know why? The marking scheme will specify exactly what you're looking for. So sometimes you could write for 5 marks. These guys are writing a whole composition. You're like, madness. Where do I start from? Right? So what I would normally do is I would read through the marking scheme. The marking scheme would actually guide me. And I'll actually be able to say, this is from all these words, this is all you're looking for. Fantastic. That would really help. And I can tell you because I create my own marking scheme. Sometimes I'm just looking for, the pin in the haystack. In questions about audit risk and auditors' response to risk, do we have to give a couple of responses to audit risks, such as discuss with management and inspect? Or can we just write discuss with? Fantastic question. Don't just write discuss with management. Discuss with management about what? Because if you just write discuss with management, it could be gossip, right? Like, hey man, hey, that guy, he drank my coffee, man. What's wrong? You don't want to engage in such. Did you hear the latest politics drama? You don't want that. Right? So when you're writing discuss with management, what do you exactly want to discuss with management about? Secondly, even with obtained written representations, my hack for you here, obtained written representations works very well with areas of judgment, provisions, depreciation, estimates. Those are the areas where you can use obtained written representations because going concern, because you appreciate the fact that those are the areas of judgment. So we do need some written representations, okay? But we discuss with management. Tell me what you want to discuss with me about. Maybe sometimes you're just checking me out. That's dangerous, Now, is it true that audit language is different? I come in peace. But now you have to appreciate the fact that there are certain terminologies, yes, we use. All right? It's not like we're aliens, you understand? But there are certain terminologies we use. And we appreciate the fact that sometimes doing as many questions as possible gives you an awareness of those terminologies. So I appreciate the fact that when I'm looking at audit language is different. It's not that it's that different. It's just that you're explaining to me a process. We struggled to explain processes growing up. I loved to bother my mom by asking her, Mom, why is the sky blue? Like, don't ask me stupid questions. I'll slap you. I was born, my African parents, Asian parents, very interesting people. But you do appreciate the fact that if you go to that point of explanation, it's not necessarily that it's different. You're just expressing yourself. Why? Because you're expressing opinions. All right. Is professional vocabulary important while attending? Yes, it is. We're not rapping. So we appreciate the fact that sometimes, again, inspect, review, discuss, we don't want to say talk to, right? So those are obviously professional vocabularies. Where can I revise the FA knowledge if required for audit? Fantastic question. 2 areas. One, there's this, get rich. There are these modules that we normally have in the ACCA tabs, okay, under the student resources, where you find that you can actually go back and look at some of the knowledge that was borrowed from FA, and also the study hub, right? You can just click up and just click on a few aspects of FA there. You need to add all 3 components for a mark or one of the 3, just one. You don't need all 3 because if you go saying this is a new audit client, then you go saying there's a detection risk, inherent, control. No, just one, all right? And again, for me, that's not my favorite because most times students struggle with that, okay? How do I answer the review and reporting question? It appears to be difficult formulating an answer on the audit opinion. Fantastic question. 2 things. I've actually broken that down. But secondly, I also want you to go through a video I did on the audit report. I'm sure it will be very important. How can I determine if the misstatement is pervasive? Let me be honest, pervasive normally happens only once with going concern at your level. Pervasive means it's spread like COVID. It's like Corona, 98% everywhere, which will not normally be the case, with most areas. So that's where I'd put it as, all right? How relevant is the AA to the advanced AA? Like what extent? Man, heavily. My AAA topper only read AA content and practiced AAA questions. So that should answer your question, right? Can we write the substantive procedure as auditor's report related to the audit risk? Wow, that's 3 different concepts. Substantive procedures, report, risk, Those are three different stages. Risk is at the planning stage, substantive procedures in the collection of evidence, the report is the finalization of all. So I wouldn't say that you can write it as if I can borrow your question very well. With only 2 weeks remaining, while tackling both audit and FR, can I still pass with minimal knowledge? Get your knowledge in base, but listen, we're here to help you, right? We have topic explainer videos that break this chunk size, this heavy content into chunk sized information. You can do this. Now, unfortunately, I'll have to stop there. Man, your questions are impressive. What you can do, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Roger Gitonga. I am always going to try to reply to any student through recordings so that you can listen to me again and again. I don't think I have a bad voice, so you won't go to sleep. And I hope that you've really enjoyed today's session. I hope it was rich for you. I wish you guys the very best. I'm sure you can do this. This thing is not as hard. I mean, we've done it. You have to appreciate the fact that audit and any other paper in ACCA is human created. It's not God created. So just the same way a human made this, you can also understand it. It is not impossible. I am vouching for you. And I really hope that we will receive fantastic news, right? Next month, but one that you've actually passed. When you wake up and you see your results and you'll say, man, I did it. On to the next one. I congratulate each and every one of you for coming this far as well, whether through exemptions or you've gone through the struggle from foundations or from BT. I celebrate all of you. You're not here by mistake. All right, you've done it, and I can't wait to welcome each and every one of you into membership. Do have a lovely rest of the time. I don't know what time it is where you're coming from, but I do hope to hear from you if you have more questions. Let's connect. Let's keep the hope alive. Let's read more. This video shall be available to you. The link shall be sent to you again by tomorrow, and the video shall also be uploaded on the ACCA Students Resources tab on YouTube. If you've not subscribed, subscribe and like, as we like to say it. You have a lovely one, and thank you very much.